On today's World Insight, ramped up diplomacy between China and the U.S., the latest, a frank exchange between Chinese senior diplomat Wang Yi and the U.S.'s former top diplomat Henry Kissinger. That's on the heels of the China visits of U.S. climate envoy John Kerry and U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. How did these interactions help thaw cold relations?
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight on CGTN. China and the U.S. have ramped up diplomacy in recent weeks. On Wednesday, Chinese senior diplomat Wang Yi met with former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in Beijing. Mr. Wang says China's U.S. policy has been highly consistent under the core principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. For his part, Mr. Kissinger says that both the U.S. and China are key global influencers, and maintaining stable relations between the two is crucial for world peace and stability. On the same day, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry wrapped up his third visit to China. During the visit, Mr. Kerry met with Chinese Premier Qiang, Wang Yi, the Chinese top diplomat, and also his Chinese counterpart Zhenhua in Beijing. So where are bilateral relations headed at this moment? Where is the issue of climate change and discussions related to that in the overall relationship? Let's loop in our panelists, both from China and the U.S. On the significance of Kerry's visit to China and the discussions taking place since then, we have in Guangzhou, Guangxi Province, Deborah Seligson, an assistant professor at Villanova University and senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And also in Suzhou, Lin Xu, the chairman and the partner of China U.S. Green Fund. And in Beijing, Zhang Jianyu, the executive director of the BRI Green Development Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you, a reunion here. All of you are key players, influencers, and also advocates of cooperation between China and the United States on the green and climate change issues. Tell me more about what do you think of the latest meetings between Mr. Kerry and his Chinese counterparts. Deborah, shall I start with you?
Thanks so much. I'm actually in Guangdong. I was in Guangxi yesterday.
Good to see you.
I mean, and what I've seen on the ground is just fantastic, I have to say. So I think the key thing was to get the discussion going again. I mean, these days, both the U.S. and China have their own climate policies. They're very different in structure. Each are going to do them according to what works best in their own sort of political and economic system. And so what we need to do is progress together. And really the things that we should be talking about now are, first of all, certain hard technical questions that we really could use cooperation on. And secondly, sort of what we need to do together for the rest of the world, you know, to make the COP a success in November.
Right.
So I think starting the discussions again is the most important aspect of this particular visit.
Get the ball rolling, as they say, isn't it? At this point, we are seeing the discussion coming with some kinds of feedback to the media. The press conference by Mr. Kerry was delayed for 2.5 hours. I was there waiting from 7 p.m. until later after 9 o'clock before it happened. So actually, one of the important things that you would see is that he's talking about the two sides will work, quote unquote, intensively in the weeks ahead as they are preparing for crucial COP28 climate talks in Dubai. And he's talking about it is not a one-off meeting. That's a quote coming from Mr. Kerry during the presser. Going to you, Mr. Zhang, you're following both the press conference and his visit to China every step of the way. Your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, I think this is the first time both sides met face to face for quite a long time, and I think they all came in with high expectations, not only because it is the first time they just met, but also if you're looking forward to the next 4 months, many important meetings have already been lined up. For example, in August, there's going to be the G20 climate ministers meeting. In September, there's going to be the UN climate meeting. In October, there's going to be the BRI conference here in China. And then there's the COP28. So I think, time is running out. And I think the whole world is watching and also expecting that both sides will be able to produce something.
Mr. Xu, you've been doing a lot of investment working with your American and European counterparts in green area. Tell me more about, as an entrepreneur, your takeaway of what is going on with the latest visit.
Okay, since Chinese government has already set the target to reach the carbon peak and the carbon neutrality in 2030 and by 2060. So the government has already accelerating the process of decarbonization for this country. So in China, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially the companies, they are doing a lot of things trying to accelerate the progress in the green and the low carbon technologies in this area. So U.S. China Green Investment Fund, we are doing the equity investment in these areas. So we are finding a lot of private entrepreneurs with very good sound technologies in this area. So by my experience in the last 2 years, I'm quite positive in this area that because the technology progress in this area probably is much faster than we expected before. So I think in China, we have already done a lot of things. But for the whole global issues, I think U.S. and China as the largest economy in this country, we have to do a lot of things to cooperate in this area to promote the global decarbonization in the next decade, maybe even much longer time.
Yes, Deborah, I know you are traveling in Beijing, in Guangxi, and now you're in Guangdong. You talk to entrepreneurs also. You talk to people at the grassroots level. What have you noticed? 3 years away from China, in terms of climate, green development, what is the reality?
Well, what I'm hearing, I mean, especially from, local governments and state-owned enterprises, is that people just feel tremendous pressure to really decarbonize, to reduce their energy use, to switch over to renewables where they can, to, I look at heavy industries like steel and cement, and you talk to these companies and they're busy experimenting with new technologies to try to really reduce their carbon. I mean, in terms of carbon per unit production, carbon intensity, all of these companies have already done a lot, right? And so they're now looking at what else they can do. And, some of these technologies are not mature yet, but there's a lot of attention being paid, a lot of work going on.
Yeah.
And I think people are taking it very, very seriously. And what struck me, I was in Liuzhou in Guangxi province, and people were talking about Kerry's visit. I can guarantee you that when a climate negotiator comes to Washington, no one in Dubuque is talking about the visit. So I think the level of attention to climate change here is just huge.
Right. Jianyu, we look at some of the timelines, very significant. Earlier, January the 11th, there was an important meeting in China talking about the priority change from energy cap to carbon cap. Later, during China's meeting of conference on ecological development, the Chinese president once again reiterated unswervingly implementing the earlier plan 2030-2060, one is carbon peaking, carbon neutralization. And also, meanwhile, has been talking about some of the points and methods along the way that China will take. How do you look at how the China timeline correlates with the discussions going on between China and U.S. this time and leading up to a future discussion in the next few weeks?
Well, I think China came into this discussion with, I would say, more than 100% sincerity. You mentioned about the July 11th meeting for the deep reform conference, in which the government finally ruled out the what we call the 双转, the transformation from energy cap and energy intensity to carbon cap and carbon intensity. This was something that was proposed a long time ago, but I think it was the first time that it would really get inked into policy, so that it sent a really clear signal to the whole country that during the 14th five-year plan, the management is going to shift from purely looking at the energy, but to carbon, so as to really embody the pledge by the president of the 2030 and 2060 goals. And as you said, Monday and Tuesday, we just held our next, the NICE National Ecological, what we call that All China Environmental Conference, basically the NICE one, that was held every 5 years. And in this one, the president, he himself, reconfirmed, I think basically made the announcement to the whole world that we'll stick to his pledge of 2030 and 2060. And also, very importantly, in his talk, he emphasized on this whole thing that China wants to move ahead was just to be a contributor to the global climate movement, but also to be a torchbearer. So China wants to lead in this campaign. Again, I think all of those have sent a very clear signal. If I read it to Kerry's Kerry's team, that we are ready, we are prepared. These are all the announcements, all the pledges that we have made. Let's show us what you can do, and let's work out something.
Now, Zhenhua, from now until UAE meeting, so in Dubai, how do you see China and U.S. can cooperate, leading up to designing a roadmap or inspiration for all the other economies at COP28? Briefly from you.
Well, I think two countries, they are under tremendous pressure to produce something, because I think the whole world is watching the two largest emitters on Earth and two largest economies on Earth, what they can agree with each other. Remember, back to 8 years ago, it was U.S. and China that produced a joint statement that really laid the foundation for the Paris Agreement, which became, the foundation for everything that we're talking about. And also this year, I think everybody is feeling the heat, right? I don't want to exaggerate, but no word is exaggeration to describe, really the tremendous heat that we are under.
Indeed.
So I think there are going to be ample opportunities lining up in front of us. I outlined some of them. The G20 meeting. I forgot one, which is going to be the November of the APEC meeting.
Right.
I think they're going to have ample opportunities to talk with each other. But again, China, I think, came with sincerity. It's up to the U.S. to came with something as the right counterpart, so that they can agree on something.
Deborah, your observation, what's likely to be and should be included in that discussion that both sides can really work on together?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is, as I said before, I think there are specific technical things that are not ready for market. I mean, if things are ready for market, our companies should just compete and sell the best. But there are things like certain of the more difficult methane problems, carbon capture and storage, maybe even direct air capture, where there's a lot of scientific technical work we could do together. We also can work together on policy questions, what we like to call in the U.S. just transition, but basically, how do you help all the people in the fossil fuel industry and in those communities that have depended on the fossil industry, which both countries have a lot of? How do you help them move on to other fields and sort of revive economies in some of these very fossil fuel dependent areas, the Shanxi province or West Virginia or even Wyoming. So I think there's a lot of stuff we could work on together for bilateral, but multilaterally, I mean, we need to talk about how we can help the poorer countries in the developing world,
Right.
the least developed countries, the small island states, both with ensuring that they have clean energy. I mean, they're not going to be a big part of the problem, but they
Okay.
don't want to be any part of the problem. And we need to help them with adaptation because, as we all can see right now, the world is getting hotter and more
Right.
dangerous much faster than we ever expected.
Here is something, Jianyu, I come back to you for analysis as well, because China and the U.S. We're starting from very different places. One is one of the world's biggest emitter in history, the U.S. The other is China now facing the danger of becoming even bigger emitter today. So how do you see the two countries will be able to, given the complexity, geopolitics, and many other things, be able to figure out something with some simple logic at least that could help COP28 to start up with?
Well, I think both countries came in with, as you said very accurately, very different situation, different conditions. But I think one thing, at least the two countries have agreed on, is climate change is the existential threat, probably the biggest challenge that human being is facing right now. And I think if we can agree with each other that that threat that is going to likely to destroy us can override any other differences that we have temporarily or in the long run, and put our differences on hold. These days people like to use the word guardrails. I think this is one of the guardrails that we can corner our differences, but really sort of work on something together. One suggestion I really have for the two countries is that if we have such a difficulty working with each other respectively in your whole respective countries, maybe we can work on something together in the third country, as Debbie just described. There are many poor countries, developing countries. Those countries will be affected the most by climate change, sea level rise. Those places that we probably, I think both countries have really a strong commitment to help those countries to fight with climate change.
Yeah.
And by starting with those, I think maybe can take us somewhere.
Good point. Lin, your thoughts from an entrepreneurial spirit. What are your suggestions? Mr. Xu?
Okay. Yeah, I think, as for the geopolitical differences in the current period of time, we have to find the places or fields that U.S. and China can have the common understandings, which we can cooperate on some kind of points. I think the low carbon and the green finance area is one of the areas that U.S. and China can cooperate. So we can find a way to have a kind of cooperation on the green finance areas through the multilateral development financial institutions like the World Bank and the ADB and maybe other development banks. And on the other way, that we can organize a kind of cooperation field to have the entrepreneurs, especially the private corporations, to work together to have a kind of the equity investment fund or other kind of funds to invest in the global fields
Right.
on the green technologies and other investment projects. I think in this area there were huge demand for the investment or financing. So the green energy transformation for the whole world is quite huge. Even for China, I think is more than maybe several billions or trillions RMB investment. So for the whole world, even the demand is much huge in this area. So why don't U.S. and China, as the two largest economies in the world, to work together to investment and to
Right.
promote the technology development progress in this area?
I hear you, certainly, sir. I hope many of the politicians working on this and also many of the policymakers can also hear voices taking place today in our discussion. Having said that, though, related to what you just said, is an interesting issue about solar power. That is quite an uprising, horizon for all of us in order to transform and decarbonize. At this point, Jianyu, I understand China, together with Southeast Asian economies, for example, in the year 2022, is exporting to the United States 29 gigawatts of solar panels and modules. Well, the U.S. produced about 5 gigawatts of that. Obviously, you could see that the U.S. majorly is importing from other countries in order to fulfill the needs. Now, but there is the issue of tariffs, for example, against solar panels coming from China, which is the largest manufacturing of solar panels in this world, and certainly one of the biggest users of solar panels in this world, given how much is coming from solar and also wind these days. But tell me more about how do you see, the bigger picture and also issues very specific like this?
Well, I think this is a really great example that why you need to work with each other, right? I think China's strength is China is really good at manufacturing to produce very high quality, low cost, and very reliable products. While the U.S. side, is the largest consumer, as you said, for this product, particularly after the promulgation of the IRA, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which provides subsidy to households and to individual families, installing the solar panels. You cited the numbers, and I think the thing that impressed me the most is really China with its tremendous manufacturing capability has been providing, I think, one public good that is really the key to solve this problem, which is reduce the cost. I mean, when I started this business about 20 years ago, I think the price has decreased to about 1/10 of what it was before. Okay. That's really something that gives people the confidence that we'll be able to solve this problem. I think tariff is something that in the field of trade, and people have different sort of motivations doing that. But again, as I said earlier, if we really recognize climate change as an existential threat, what we really do is put some guardrails around it and try to say, how we can take advantage of each other's competence and solving this problem together. I mean, U.S. today, if we really want to implement the IRA and achieve what they committed in Paris, they need the solar panels from China or Southeast Asia. But I have to give credit a little bit to President Biden because he vetoed the vetoes from the Congress of keeping those tariffs. So, sorry, the waiver of the tariff. So at least I think that's a positive sign that should be recognized.
Yeah, I want to go to Deborah for a similar question as well. Deborah.
So, I mean, my personal opinion is I wish the Biden administration would start reducing the China tariffs that came on during the Trump administration. I mean, they haven't changed the shape of trade, and they cost American consumers money. I will note that Chinese companies have been, very smart at dealing with these tariffs. So when you say China plus Southeast Asia, the reality is a lot of the exports from Southeast Asia are Chinese companies that have moved their manufacturing in order to avoid the tariffs, which is what smart companies do. So I think, the companies will find ways to work around it. I don't think the tariffs are beneficial to the United States, but I do think that given the Inflation Reduction Act, we are going to see the uptake in the United States, regardless of whether some of our policies are more expensive for Americans than they really need to be. And the other thing is we do need manufacturing in the United States. That when we look at countries that have allowed their manufacturing to become completely hollowed out, it's not good politically. It creates much too much of a huge gap between rich and poor without a sufficient middle. And for social stability reasons, I think the Biden administration's choice to really try to ramp up manufacturing, much of it in the states that actually voted for Trump, that are full of people who are very dissatisfied with American society, hopefully brings them into a more constructive mindset while also ensuring that we have resources going forward and can deal with future supply chain shocks like we had during COVID.
Now, even it is about the issue of climate, China and the U.S., in terms of the cooperation, the nature of cooperation and the prospect of cooperation actually was very different from the earlier times. Now, when we are talking about China-U.S. relations, we have seen not only Mr. Kerry's visit as a special envoy of the president on climate, but also earlier senior administration visit, starting from the State Secretary of State to the Treasury Secretary. And we are also hearing news about more interactions in the future. So how are we seeing both sides trying to grab this window opportunity before next year, the U.S. election year, and trying to figure out something before APEC economic leaders meeting so that there will be more ambience for both sides to contribute even more to the global discussion of peace and development? Let's go to Lin very briefly before I go to the other two. Everybody has 30 seconds if we can. Lin, please.
Okay. Yes, I think the government, of course, should promote the communications by different ways. But in the other way, I think the non-government organizations should communicate more to have a kind of common understandings. And based on that, we can providing what the non-government communications that we have already achieved to providing this as a basis for the government communication or negotiations.
I see.
So, for example, China U.S. Green Fund, we have already, participated the climate change communications with U.S. counterparts. Right. This is kind of track 2 negotiation or communications.
Point. Yes, we are running out of time. We have 30 seconds for the other people as well. Deborah, 30 seconds for you.
So I agree. I think we need more people to people. I mean, that was one of the things Secretary Blinken agreed to with Wang Yi and others in Beijing. I think it's also in the 20th Party Congress communique that people to people is important. So absolutely, let's do more, all of us together.
All right, Jian, you have 20 seconds left, unfortunately.
I think everybody is expecting more turbulence politically in the U.S. for the next year. And so we need to figure out, I think, stabilizing force as much as possible. Again, not just between the two countries, but also with the whole world. So
thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. I really appreciate all your input. We are running out of time. Thanks for watching. I'm Tian Wei. Bye for now.